You can't swear off poverty or prison. I sighed, twirling the pass for my new workplace in my hands. To say I wasn't exactly thrilled about working as a merchandiser in a certain well-known red and white grocery chain would be an understatement. It wasn't so much that I was ashamed of the job. Rather, I was deeply dissatisfied with the path necessity had forced me down. The need for stable money, dictated by an unexpected firing from my previous job. Of course, I consoled myself that the whole situation wouldn't last long, and I'd soon stumble upon a more suitable vacancy. And any work, especially physical labor, didn't scare me. I slept poorly that night, constantly thrashing in my sleep, tossing from one side to the other, and waking up repeatedly. Everything seemed to deliberately conspire to prevent me from sleeping. The ticking clock, the sounds of tires screeching, the cats fighting outside my window. And then, toward morning, the rain started drumming, causing the branches of nearby trees to tap against the glass. I finally realized I couldn't get back to sleep and decided to get up. Staring out the window at the miserable weather, I listened to the rain's drumbeat on the sill and mused, recalling how much I'd loved such stormy days at my last job. Of course, the weather doesn't matter when you don't have to leave your warm, cozy apartment with food, coffee, and a smoke break just 2 steps away. Yes, back then I truly adored those overcast days. They were days free of the feeling that life was passing you by. Unlike sunny days when everyone, from the smallest to the oldest, pours out onto the street. Everyone but you. The kettle whistling throughout the kitchen yanked me from my heavy thoughts and back to reality. I generously scooped 2 heaping spoons of coffee into my mug. I definitely wouldn't regret that today. My workday was from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., and I was already on my feet at 5 rad. 1 mug would certainly be insufficient. I should take a thermos of extra strong coffee with me. Mug in hand, I headed out to the balcony. I'll admit this balcony is what I'll miss the most. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but after moving into this apartment following my grandfather's death, I thoroughly renovated it and arranged everything so that being here was a pleasure. I gave special preference to the balcony because I quite often spent my time right there. Here I read, spoke with clients, drank my morning or afternoon coffee, and, of course, frequently enjoyed an aromatic cigarette, savoring the tart taste of the drink and the picturesque view from the 8th floor. I took a drag and surveyed the familiar sights. The well-maintained square with straight rows of shrubs, which were, as always, neatly trimmed. The colorful, still-closed ice cream stand nearby. The benches were being fiercely hammered by the cold. Large drops of the morning downpour, through all the grayness covering the city. I could make out the red awning of the store I was heading to in a couple of hours. Only not as a customer. Well, there was one plus in that. The commute wasn't far. Finishing my cigarette and coffee, I sat down in the armchair and leaned back, trying to form a plan for the next few hours. I don't know which morning ritual led to the following consequences, but I suddenly opened my eyes, spending a few seconds trying to figure out what was wrong. I only snapped back when I glanced at my mobile phone screen, which displayed the time, 9:01. I didn't even have the heart to curse myself for the foolish blunder. Had I known, I would have just slept on the balcony in the first place. 15 minutes later, I was running out the door, simultaneously concocting a credible excuse for being late on my first day. Fortunately, there weren't many shoppers yet in the morning. As I approached, I noticed with relief that the lights were off in the store, and I couldn't see a single employee or customer from the street. Satisfied that I hadn't mixed anything up and had arrived at the correct time, I decided to find out what was happening on location. So I turned toward the employees' entrance, which was unlocked for some reason. Entering the premises, I felt a terrible awkwardness. Fumbling to close my umbrella with its broken spoke, I frantically wondered what excuse I'd concoct, or if it wouldn't be necessary, and I'd simply be sent packing immediately. But neither was required. Raising my eyes to look for anyone, my gaze landed on a woman who looked to be of average middle age. What made her unusual was one interesting characteristic. She was looking at me with only one eye, the other being absent. The setting of the room we were in clearly signaled that no one was welcome here. The floor had no covering, not even cheap chipped tiles, only bare concrete. The walls were the same, and the picture was completed by a constantly flickering light bulb dangling from a single wire on the ceiling. A pure horror film. Yet on one of the repulsive walls hung some sort of certificate for excellent work. Wonderful. Good day. I was hired as a merchandiser yesterday, I said quietly, hoping for some reaction. Are you the manager? They told me to go to her first thing. I brought the documents here. I nodded toward my backpack. In that moment, the woman managed to change her expression twice. First, I noticed something like disgust and clear displeasure in her eyes. Immediately after, it was replaced by chilling coldness. She silently handed me a timesheet, thrust a pen at me without explanation, pointed to the chair she had been sitting on, stood up, and walked out, leaving me bewildered. And what am I supposed to do with all this? Quickly skimming the timesheet, I found a list of idiotic questions like, what is your salary expectation? How many hours are you willing to spend at work? Is it essential for you to return home after every shift? What is this nonsense? Went through my head as I pondered what to do with all this splendor next. As far as I could remember, we had discussed all salary expectations and other questions during the interview. Today was just for the paper part of the registration. Maybe she got something mixed up? Ignoring the papers, I opened the door the stranger had exited and found myself inside the store, among the shelves and numerous products. I wasn't particularly surprised by the absence of customers at such an early and unpopular hour for shopping. However, something else made me uneasy. The employees. There simply wasn't a single one. I walked the entire store back and forth, went along the shelves, and further toward the cash registers, where someone should definitely be sitting and monitoring, or at least a security guard. Nothing of the sort. I looked around and a wild thought flashed through my mind. Steal a bun from the shelf. I had never suffered from kleptomania, not even for small things. But here I didn't even have time to think. I hadn't had breakfast because I'd overslept, and I was getting angrier from the growing anxiety inside. It felt as if fate itself was tormenting me. Not only shouldn't I be stuck here in the first place, but what was merely bad had become terrible. Without thinking, I unwrapped the package and bit off a substantial piece of the sweet pastry. Raspberry jam. I'm not a big fan of sweets, actually. But at that moment, I felt an irresistible craving for it. I don't know how much time passed before a voice called out to me. Decided to have breakfast, newbie? The unusually friendly voice said, making me turn around in surprise. Good morning? Yes, something like that. Didn't have time this morning. It's my first day. I need to complete my paperwork today, but I can't find the manager. I think I got mixed up with someone. They gave me an interview questionnaire, but I've already come to work. After all that chattering, I finally collected myself and fell silent, properly examining the person talking to me for the first time. I was facing a slightly hunched yet quite lively man, about 50 years old, with a wide smile and a greedy gaze that, unlike the look of the strict blonde at the entrance, didn't try to evade me. On the contrary, it seemed to be trying to remember me forever. This moment made me somewhat uneasy, but I didn't show it. After all, people his age can sometimes be lonely. Maybe he has no one else to talk to here but me? While I was thinking all this, the man continued to stare intently at me. Only his smile began to stretch wider and wider with every second. Do you like raspberry jam? He suddenly asked, catching me off guard. You mean this? I showed him the bun. Yes, the first thing my eye fell on. Even though I work here, I can still say the pastries here are nothing like homemade. Since you haven't eaten a damn thing, as I can see, why don't you drop by for lunch? I'll treat you to tea and pies. Sounds great, I'd love to. But where should I go now? Who will give me tasks? Who will do the paperwork? Where is that woman? The man asked, ignoring the rest of my questions. The one who met me, I told you, in the staff room right by the entrance. She has light hair. A perm, I think. Listen, I've worked here for a long time, but I don't recall any middle-aged blondes. How can you not remember? What about the manager? She is also— I told you, no means no. He cut me off, turned, and walked away. I was left standing there with the bun in my hands. I had no idea how to interpret the strange behavior of the last 2 employees. The man was somewhat understandable, though eccentric. First pies, then jam, then he knows no one. In the farthest corner of the store, closer to the warehouse, I noticed a pile of unstocked goods. A new delivery, then. Maybe the person I spoke to was the driver. Then what was he doing here before lunch? A phone call pulled me from my thoughts. The number was unfamiliar. It's not good to talk at work, of course, but I can hear you, I said confidently. Alexander, hello. The voice on the other end was cheerfully chirpy, even excessively so. This is Marina Vyacheslavna. You had an interview with us yesterday. Yes, I was just about to ask about the manager and the store in general. Did I definitely get to the right place? It's almost 10, and I've only met 1 employee so far, not counting the woman at the entrance who completely ignored me. Excuse the stupid question, but why have I been alone in a large store for half an hour now? Oh, Alexander, you're not alone. That's what I'm telling you, Alexander. You will never be alone here. The high voice suddenly broke and sounded like a harsh metallic screech. The line went dead. What the? I will never be alone here. Well, fine. Tired of all this morning absurdity, I headed toward the items that needed to be stocked. Since no one wanted to talk to me, I decided to just work. I spent quite a long time on this task, long enough to realize that not a single customer had passed me. Yes, I was in the very farthest corner of the store, but I hadn't seen anyone, even from a distance. At some point, this reality began to severely strain my nerves, and I decided to go back to the cash registers. Coming out from behind the corner, I saw the silhouette of a cashier in the distance. He was sitting with his back to me, not talking to a customer or anyone else, but just sitting perfectly still, holding his back surprisingly straight. At some point, it began to seem to me that I had seen him exactly like this when I first walked around the store. It sounds like a joke, but I was terribly afraid to go closer. As a healthy, strong guy, I didn't know how to explain to myself the primal terror that boiled in my blood. It felt as if I approached, something would irrevocably disappear, something would change. And then the cashier turned and looked me straight in the eye. A second passed, and I realized the cashier hadn't turned his body completely toward me, only his head. And when I say head, I mean only his head turned. The guy's mouth was stretched into a wide smile. His eyes remained distant, cold, yet he was smiling with utter blankness. I thought I was hallucinating. Cold sweat broke out on my body. He called me over by my name, though I had only told it to one person. I obediently followed him, unable to take my eyes off the mysterious smile. Frankly, I was driven by curiosity mixed with confusion and horror. This was that moment when you realize, either you find out now, or never. I chose now. When I got right up to the cashier, his body suddenly spun around with the chair, making a noise, and he was facing me in a realistic posture. He looked into my eyes and held out an incomprehensible bundle, which was smeared with something greasy and slimy, and asked me to be sure to take it to Ivanich in the warehouse. After that, he continued to smile, which gave the impression that the person had been taught one basic emotion that he tried to use in all circumstances. I rushed to Ivanich at the warehouse, stumbling over my feet and completely beside myself. To my surprise, the same man was indeed in the warehouse, busy solving a crossword puzzle. Seeing me, he was childishly happy, jumped up, and took the bundle from me, carefully tucking it into a small refrigerator. After Ivanich slammed the refrigerator door, an unpleasant smell spread through the small room. Something smells rotten in there, I think. Did the sausage go bad? Ivanich ignored my comment, adding, Hurry up, stock the goods, and then come back to me for tea and pies. And don't forget the box with the red tape. You don't need to unpack it. Bring it straight to me, right now." Ivanich said cheerfully, and sat back down on the chair with a clear conscience, staring at his crossword. I closed the door behind me and paused. I was ready to accept the strange woman and the overly odd cashier. But what did Ivanich need that bundle for? And most importantly, what was in it? I took the ill-fated box to the warehouse and continued stocking the goods. As I worked, I kept churning all these questions over in my head, not noticing how the smell I had caught in the warehouse began to spread around me. I looked around, not noticing anything suspicious. The warehouse door remained closed. In one hand, I held a packaged croissant. The packaging felt perfectly clean, yet the stench was still emanating from it. I frantically started digging through the huge box, only to discover that the deeper I plunged my hand, the stronger the smell became. The lower packages were smeared with some kind of yellowish slime. I nearly cursed aloud because of all the wasted work that now needed to be fixed, when suddenly my hand hit an object that easily slipped from my grasp, falling back into the box. I grabbed the box in a panic, dumping all its contents onto the floor. Suddenly, among the packages of croissants, an object appeared that absolutely should not have been there. It was an eye, a human eye with a blue iris and bloody speckles that had turned brown due to its prolonged stay in a confined space. The entire eye in general looked unpleasant, but the most unpleasant thing was that it was detached from its rightful owner. Remembering the woman's face from the morning, I felt the blood drain from my face. This can't be happening. Rushing to the other boxes, I started angrily tearing them open and dumping them out. A couple of boxes were empty, or rather, they contained only what they were supposed to. A thought suddenly struck me, and I ran to the frozen food shelf. Looking at the top of the display case, I saw nothing untoward. Mince, cutlets, meat. Sliding the display glass open, I began to search the lower rows of shelves, pulling out the frozen items to see the bottom. I was almost calming down when a small, insignificant but crucial detail caught my attention at the bottom of the refrigerator. I saw what looked like a small yellowish pebble or a residue at the bottom. Reaching to scrape it off, I caught it with my finger and felt the object's hardness. Prying it off, I brought it close to my face, and the morning bun came back up. It was a yellow human fingernail in the frozen meat. I rushed to the second refrigerator nearby and accidentally caught a box with my foot, kicking it several meters away. It fell, and I saw something leaking out of it. Carefully approaching it, I saw something I never wanted to see. A rotten, bloated human hand without nails was emitting a nauseating odor. It didn't have the characteristic bluish corpse color, because it had been lying there for God knows how long. I looked at it and didn't understand what had happened to its owner, but I certainly didn't envy his fate. I sank to the floor next to the refrigerator, clutching my head. All the events of the day simply wouldn't compute. I wanted to head straight for Ivanich and demand an explanation. Gathering my courage, I opened my eyes, and looking straight ahead, I saw the first customer of the day, a girl with a long, thick braid, looking intently at me, placed mints into her basket, picking up a package right off the floor where I had left them. "Miss, wait," was all I managed to say. "It's my favorite," she said, smiling, and walked on without looking at me again. I didn't stay on the floor for long before running to the warehouse. I was terribly scared. My heart was pounding in my throat, and I wanted at least one person in this whole madhouse to understand what I meant. When I burst into the warehouse and started shouting something to Ivanich, with frantic eyes about how everyone had gone crazy, I didn't immediately notice his overly calm demeanor, because calmness and cold-bloodedness are far from the same thing. "I was just waiting for you." Ivanich smiled so paternally that I was almost touched, but I remembered why I had come. "Ivanich, I found a hand and a fingernail." "Eat first, then tell me what and where you found it. Are you married?" he asked in a matter-of-fact tone. I stared silently at the set table, but none of the appetizers looked appetizing anymore. Everywhere I looked, I saw danger. Too many coincidences for one day. When Ivanich took out a knife, I flinched, but he smiled and reached for the sausage. "Are you afraid it's not fresh? Let me cut you a new sandwich," he said with a note of concern. Meanwhile, he picked up the sausage. I didn't like it, I must admit, especially when I suddenly spotted another fingernail among the white flecks of fat, seemingly deliberately sticking its sharp end towards me. I held on when he slapped the exact piece with the nail onto the sandwich. I held on when he broke a pie in half, and I sought a blood-red filling that, contrary to Ivanich's description, looked nothing like raspberry jam. I held on when he stood up and opened the refrigerator, and the awful smell hit me again. Only now, I knew its source. Giving into an inner impulse, I lunged at the refrigerator, pushing Ivanich so hard he tumbled onto the chair. Now I had no questions. None left. Staring back at me was the face of the girl I had just interviewed with. Her head had been crudely cut, and even seemed to have been torn off. The skin of her neck lay in an unpleasant, crumpled clump beneath her head. She was no longer smiling. Her mouth was stitched shut, and something, I thought, was shoved inside. Next to it was a jar of something pickled, like tomatoes. A refrigerator of contrasts. I turned to Ivanich. Eyeballs inside. They pickle better that way. "Want some?" It wasn't a jar of pickles. It was eyes. The air was thick with a stale smell. It was hot. Without opening my eyes, I realized I wasn't in my own bed. I was lying, or rather, sprawled, against a shabby wall, the chipped corner of which dug into my shoulder, its presence growing more palpable with every second. A dull ache in my hand forced me to fully regain consciousness and open my eyes. A gloom surrounded me. I was in a basement, judging by the characteristic feeling of dampness and the absence of windows. The light flickered on for a few seconds, then disappeared again. A light bulb down the distant corridor was blinking treacherously, refusing to shine properly or just burn out. It was severely grating on my nerves. Fully awake, I tried to pull any meaningful memories from my mind. I was constantly distracted by the awful smell, which grew stronger the longer I was conscious. I needed a drink. I tried to sit up, feeling a heaviness all over my body, and for a long time I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I was sitting awkwardly, and soon began to fall sideways. And then it hit me. My hand, leaning on the floor, I felt a sharp pain that ran through the place where my little and ring fingers used to be. Staring at my hand in horror, I clearly saw that a pair of fingers were missing. The basement door burst open, and a moment later, Ivanich appeared before me, smiling happily as he looked at me. Light from the other room poured into the dark space, giving me just enough to see what was behind Ivanich's back. Behind him, pooling all the horror of my life, lay a heap of remains. Primarily upper extremities. Hands, fingers, a few phalanges lying separately. They say, Ivanich pulled me from my thoughts, that by eating rotten remains, a person starts to behave differently. "You saw Pashka, right?" He chuckled, referring to our cashier. I nodded. "Soon you'll be sitting across from him, at the other checkout. But first..." Ivanich paused, then pulled out the jar of eyes from inside his jacket, the same one I had stumbled upon earlier, and smiled a dreadful smile this time. Music. And a special heartfelt greeting from me to Kiryuka Kol, Nikolai Ovchinnikov, and Mr. Meowth. I wish you all the very best. Be healthy and happy. Thank you so much for your support.